with that very humbling introduction, please give a round of applause for Robbie Braun.
Yes.
Wow. I'd like to meet that guy. He sounds really impressive. Thank you. First of all, thanks to Google for hosting all of us here today. The campus that you're building here in Boulder is beautiful. And we're all very happy to have you, in our city and in our state. As was said, my name is Bobby Braun, and I'm the Dean of the College of Engineering and Applied Science at the University of Colorado Boulder. We are among the fastest growing engineering colleges, and we're actually one of the most diverse colleges of engineering in the country. And that's something that we're really proud about because it allows us to reach out and partner more with industry in our state, including Google. I'm a Mars guy. I guess maybe a Martian in my blood. And I've worked on a number of NASA missions, and typically I work with engineers and scientists on what it's like to build and send spacecraft to Mars. But today, I'm here with a really interesting group of people. People who I've had the pleasure to work with for a number of years now in what's been a groundbreaking television series put on by National Geographic with executive producers Ron Howard and Brian Grazer. And I got to tell you, working with these people, it's been like a family. And for me as an engineer, perhaps the best thing has been working with, not with other engineers, but with artists and, film studies folks, actors, writers, and big thinkers from across the spectrum that have been part of this innovative docudrama. How many of you have seen any of the episodes, season 1 or season 2? That's a good number. It's a good number. Season 2 is going on right now. We just last night, episode 4 was premiered on Nat Geo. They're showing on Monday nights, 9 p.m. You can catch up with those, and you can actually see episode 5 and 6 have yet to come out. Tonight on our campus at CU Boulder, we'll be premiering episode 5. You can see it on campus a week before it'll actually be shown worldwide. So that's what we're all here today. We're here for this event and then for this evening's event in Boulder. I'm here today joined with a number of the members of the show in various capacities, going from my going down this way. I always mess that up. Well, it's my left, but it's their right. Let's do it that way. The person who corrects me the most in my life is actually Stephen Petranek, who over the years has been a great friend. Stephen is a co-executive producer of the series, and in fact, the series is based on a book that Stephen wrote years ago about how we will actually live and settle the planet Mars. He's really the creative genius behind the whole series, if you will, through his book. And it's wonderful to have you here in Boulder today. Next to him is Antonia Juhasz, who is an expert in oil and energy policy and has written numerous papers and given numerous forums on those topics. In this series, she's a big thinker. So this is a series, right, that goes back and forth between the present and the future, right? So we talk about what's happening in our world today, and then we flash forward from that into how that might portray into a human settlement of Mars in the future. And Antonia has been wonderful in providing insights about climate and energy and policy, international policy issues here on the Earth, and how those same kind of issues might play out on Mars. And then next to her is actually an award-winning writer, Leonard David, who, if you're in the space community like I am, Leonard needs no introduction. But Leonard has written a book that is a companion book to the National Geographic series. If you're interested, you can pick one up on the back table there. But Leonard's book is a great companion to the series, provides wonderful context about past, present, and future Mars exploration. And so we're here today. What we're going to do is we're going to watch the trailer from season 1, just to bring you up to speed about what happened 2 years ago during season 1, which took place in the 2030s. Then we're going to show the trailer for season 2. But before I do, there's 2 other folks I definitely want to introduce very quickly in the audience who will be speaking tonight on campus. And they're actors in the Nat Geo series. And that's Sammy Rotibi. Maybe, Sammy, you want to stand up? And Evan Hall. And as someone who's consulted on the show and worked with some of the writers and actors in the production of the show, they've been fantastic. These guys, their roles are so, it's amazing how well they've suited into these roles. I know that you each have an engineering background, and you have multiple engineering degrees from CU Boulder. I'm just kidding. But from watching you all on the show, I mean, one would think that you did, and it's actually amazing.
I spoke to you first season. So
yeah, so it's been a lot of back and forth, getting ready to do that. But that's what's made this show, I think, so unique, is that it's a scientifically honest show. It's a scientifically accurate portrayal of what the future might look like based on what's happening right now in space exploration. So what we do is jump into the clips. This is season 1.
Mars will be risky, dangerous, but it'll be the greatest adventure ever in human history.
Funny thing about Mars, it feels like Earth, but it is more hostile to life than any place on Earth.
Ignition.
In the absence of gravity, lots of things can go wrong.
It's an unknown, and you're basically allowing yourself to be an experiment.
We're coming in too fast.
Warning, landing hazard.
Fore and aft jets firing.
Hang on!
Ben, can you hear me?
The question is, will you be able to survive during this crucial time of arrival?
Ben, we're losing him. We're losing him.
These people are putting their bodies at risk for us, for the human race.
When we get to Mars, we need protection from radiation.
Unmanned aerial vehicle ready.
We'll use a set of drones to find a lava tube with the conditions we need to deploy a small domed habitat.
And that little foothold will become humankind's first real home beyond the gravity well, Olympus Town.
If I push this modification any further, we risk overloading the entire electrical system.
We don't have a choice, Robert.
What is she doing?
If the topography is right and the ice is there, we can justify deployment.
I hope you're not scared of the dark.
If there was water on Mars, couldn't there possibly be life?
There's ice. We're home. Medical lab is now operational.
The greenhouse is complete.
We at MMC feel that we're ready to go faster. Phase 2 expansion will be overseen by the very best. Our dream is now a reality.
They don't know Mars.
You guys up for a welcoming committee? Base commander and a son.
Within 2 months, we'll have enough power to double the size and capacity of your facilities.
It's a little too ambitious right now.
You don't go to Mars without ambition.
I don't think we're gonna get a chance to get that reactor back online.
If you got a dust storm that lasted for a month, you'd be in big trouble.
This storm has been raging for months. They call it a season. I can't do my job. Who is going to have a real problem in space? Ultimately, there are some people who are going to have a really hard time.
The swarm is getting to everyone. Are you missing home?
I'm okay.
He lives for his work, and he can't do it. Darling?
It's Paul Richardson. What is he doing?
Greenhouse airlock compromised.
Seal the door!
As we buried our friends, the fate of the mission was back on Earth.
If you send astronauts to Mars and they die there, public opinion will prohibit you from ever doing it again.
It's a time to be strong, to make a statement that says we're here to stay.
7 of the world's most beloved scientists and astronauts are dead. You're not going to influence my recommendation to the committee. When we thought it could only get darker, there was light.
We have been talking about life on Mars forever.
Looks like aragonite crystal. Javier and I found something.
Just think about what it would mean if you found a single-cell microorganism.
Today marks the end of an era and the beginning of a new one.
It would be so exciting to wake up in the morning and think that that's what's happening.
There is life on Mars. They're here.
Commander, incoming debris. Commander, are you okay?
Big plans for this planet.
Not scientists, for God's sake. They're miners.
With the advancement of sciences comes industry.
We need to hook up to your water and your power.
Sorry?
IMSF is becoming irrelevant on your watch.
Mars, private enterprise. Yes, it's inevitable.
When we talk about what we're doing on Mars, we're really talking about what we think is okay to do here on this planet.
What's that saying? Drill, baby, drill?
IMSF has struck a deal with Lucrum Industries. Give the miners what they want.
Yes, they're doing a job, but they also are creating lives for themselves.
I came here for the adventure.
I'm pregnant. It's not like I planned this.
No, you just plan to leave.
If we go to Mars, you don't want any surprises.
This baby is born on Mars.
It could never leave here.
Go, guys. We got a target number ahead.
Technology and workers will be pushed faster than they should be pushed.
Let me help you.
And those errors have disastrous consequences.
Coexistence may prove just as challenging as it does on Earth.
Do you see something?
Only what we're looking for.
You think we're gonna let you and your company wreck this planet?
You're one crazy bitch, you know that?
If there's a place you've never been, there's a scientist who wants to know what's there.
Companies want access to new territory. At the same time, we have a counter movement that says we are not going down without a fight.
Mars is for those willing to accept a much higher level of danger.
Solar flare. It's taken out our electrical grid and our entire communications. She could freeze to death before we find her.
We've disrupted the environment, creating new conditions where diseases can spread.
What do we got? Something at the site has been making them sick. Stop the drilling.
When governments are hiding an outbreak, that's when the virus is actually winning.
I want the truth.
Tell me! You've been walking straight into the source. I'm the only one who knows this science.
She's not breathing, I need help!
Is that?
It's my opinion that this colony requires new leadership.
Lucrum colony disengaged.
Olympus Town pulled the cord on us.
Jen.
People would lie, cheat, and steal to make sure that the mission was successful, even if that costs a lot of human lives.
I take orders from my commander.
You do your job, and I'll do mine.
They've taken advantage of us at every turn, and you've let it happen.
Will we make mistakes on Mars? Yes.
We have nothing to show for it.
You see something that has unimaginable wealth, and you want to go get it.
And we're getting water today.
Initiating final prep before detonation.
Lucrum's within hours of reaching water.
Space exploration. It's where we solve problems that have never been solved before.
Are you okay with what he's doing?
Go.
I came here to find life, but not at the expense of it.
Nothing is a clean slate. We impose ourselves on everything.
The future of humanity is very much in the solar system. What kind of civilizations are we going to build?
So what you saw there was just a brief recap of season 1, which was, all about the initial settlement, the scientific undertaking that initial settlement was about, basic survival in that settlement, and then in season 2, the expansion, the inevitable expansion, as industry comes in and some of the personal challenges and conflicts that arise between science objectives and industry objectives, many of which play out in this world all the time, that we are portraying in the future on Mars. And so with that as kind of background, we could start Q&A. And so I actually have a question prepared for each of the panelists, but you are welcome to ask questions as well. I might, give you a little heads up that we're going to be asking the audience for questions in just a minute. But let me start. We'll just go this way. Let me start with you, Stephen. If that's okay.
Depends on the question.
Yeah. We'll talk about terraforming later.
All right.
But let's start out just by talking about what it's like for you personally to see this creation put together by this wonderful team of actors and writers, producers, all based on that, relatively small book that you wrote, very important but small in size, book that you wrote. How's that feel, and how do you think the portrayal has gone in terms of accuracy?
Oh, I have a mic. Good. Well, it was a big shock. I've been a science journalist my whole life, and I've never been kind of buffered up against the Hollywood syndrome. So when we first got involved in this project and the book was first optioned by Radical Media, there were all kinds of twists and turns that were kind of crazy, like getting SpaceX to cooperate with us, which was a very difficult problem initially. And then seeing how this concept of storytelling was far more important to anyone on the West Coast than the facts were to anyone on the East Coast, where I was. So there was kind of this thing going on between us. And my role quickly became not just explaining, as was Bobby's role initially in the show, not just explaining to the filmmaking people and the actors and so forth what the real facts were about being on Mars and the kinds of scenarios you could have and you couldn't have. For example, I will never forget a phone call from the director in the first season, and we were talking about actually leaving Earth and going to Mars in the trip, and they said, okay, somebody's got to die on this. How are they going to die? So I gave them like 5 scenarios. My favorite scenario was that a small meteoroid would pass through the rocket. And they said, no, we don't like that. And then I gave them a couple other scenarios. No, we don't like that. And I gave them a couple of, no, we don't like that. And it was like, well, wait a minute, what kind of scenario do you want? And they would give me one, and I would say, that isn't physically possible in space. So initially there was a lot of conflict and buffering, trying to get the people who wanted to do the storytelling and were very good at it to adapt to the physical realities of the universe. But in the end, it worked out great. And one of the things that really surprised me was that both the actors and the directors were really eager to learn. Like, when I first met the initial group of actors, every single one of them had read the book. Some of them had read the book 2 or 3 times. And the book served as kind of a primer because it kind of laid out all the facts of, what it would be like on Mars, what it would be like getting there, it's very science-based and very fact-based. And they really absorbed that and wanted to learn that. So it's been a lot of fun. And I've learned an awful lot. I thought as a journalist and as a writer and as an editor, and I used to be a kind of a writer's editor who worked with really long form kind of stories the kind of stories you would see in the New Yorker or the New York Times Sunday Magazine. I thought I knew everything that I was ever going to need to know about storytelling. And this new dimension, which is visual, taught me an awful lot. And it taught me an awful lot about scene setting in words as well as in visuals and carrying through a storyline. So I'm very grateful for the whole experience.
Thank you. Thanks. Antonia, first of all, welcome back to Boulder, your hometown.
I'm from here. Nice to be back.
It's great.
Here. Yeah.
You play an extremely important role in season 2 as one of the big thinkers. And in fact, your insights in the show, personally, I have found fascinating. The drilling on Mars, drilling on Earth, and kind of parallels and challenges in that vein. Can you talk a little bit more about how how you view what we're doing today, presently, to the Earth and on the Earth, how you view that playing out in the future on Mars.
Sure. Yeah, it is great to be home. I live in San Francisco now, but I grew up in Boulder, so it's really great to be back here and see the brand new campus, and thanks for all of you for being here. So as you saw in the previews, what's really exciting, one of the things that's really exciting about the show is I do think this model is entirely unique and a just revolutionary way of storytelling, which is the hybrid of the documentary and the drama. So they're interlaced, as you saw. You've got the dramatic series in the future on Mars, and then you have the documentary, and you go back and forth between the two, and both sets become characters in a way. Like you want to know, I think, not only what's going to happen to the characters in the drama, but what the next big thinker is going to say, because you also become invested in them because they're carried through the storyline, the documentary storyline as well. But in the first season, the documentary is basically about, the science of getting to Mars. In the second season, the documentary is really about what are the unforeseen consequences that we've treated as unforeseen consequences on Earth that have led us to a devastation of our ability to cohabitate with this planet, and will we follow those same failures as we go to the next planet, and trying to learn those lessons. And that's basically, from my perspective, or at least my role in the documentary, what my role is looking at the failure of resource extraction on Earth. And will the failure of resource extraction on Earth be carried forward? And the failure of resource extraction on Earth is really well embodied in oil extraction. And so that's sort of the tool that's followed. In season 2, as you saw, Greenpeace is followed as they go head to head with oil drilling in the Arctic, with the outcome of oil drilling in the Yamal Peninsula of the Russian Arctic, and in the drilling platform in the Norwegian Arctic. And I think what is really some of the crux of the storyline, and how I have summarized the 2 seasons from my own perspective, is the first season is looking at, will Mars kill the humans that go there? And the second season is, will the humans kill Mars? And that is looking at what's going to happen when and if this major industry comes. And the depiction of the industry in Lucrum Industries is really incredibly spot on in the way it's written, in the portrayal of the actors, in the difficulties they face, and the decision to, as Jeff, who's the actor in the clip, says, drill baby drill, quoting Sarah Palin. And I think that the lessons are really well embodied in both sets of stories. One of the critical issues that's raised, is there life on Mars? One of the big challenges that happens with oil drilling, what one sees over and over and over again with oil drilling, the history of the last 150 years of oil drilling, is the drilling goes first, and only afterwards do we then learn, oh, wait, there was this really critical natural resource. There was this group of people who lived here. There were all sorts of consequences that only get thought of as an afterthought. And one of the best examples of that in Arctic drilling, which I think is a good parallel to what could happen on Mars, is something that seems really inconsequential, and that's phytoplankton. It just looks like a seaweed. But it turns out that phytoplankton, if you destroy it, it provides 50% of the oxygen we need to live on the planet. So treating it as a sort of inconsequential thing is one of the reasons why we're facing the problem that we're facing right now. And so trying to learn the lesson, which is maybe consider the consequences first, the long-term consequences first, and just go in second with the blind pursuit of the resource.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Leonard. So it's great for you to be here today, Leonard. Our interaction dates back to actual spaceflight missions, right? And I'm typically used to seeing Leonard David articles written about InSight or about Mars 2020.
He's so happy I spelled his name right.
Yeah, Mars, all the way back to Mars Pathfinder in the 90s, right? So I'm very interested in your opinion of this show, which is a portrayal of a future mission, because I know that you've very accurately covered so many existing missions. Can you comment on that briefly?
Well, you know, I think one thing that strikes me, the drill baby drill thing, before I forget, that's also a Chris McKay line. He's a Mars scientist, and he wants to drill subsurface to look for life. So and the atmosphere is changing. I love that subtitle, because this morning I got up and I looked at InSight. We just landed on Mars a few days ago. OSIRIS-REx pulls up at an asteroid yesterday. The Japanese Space Agency has another asteroid mission that's also on target. 3 people left the Earth the other day to head to the space station. SpaceX just hurled out 60-some satellites out of one rocket and then flew the booster back. And I think that's atmosphere changing. I've never seen so much activity in the last week. And something's going on here, and it's not just NASA, but it's a global effort. And when you think about what's coming for Mars, we have Mars 2020, the NASA Super Curiosity rover. That'll take off in 2020. China's going to launch a Mars mission, a robotic Mars mission, same time period. The UAE, they're going to be launching a Mars orbiter. And it's absolutely incredible what's happening. And Mars is, it's dangerous. It's destiny. For me, I've always felt that Mars was, from a kid, covering early Mars missions, Viking, particularly in 1976. That was just a thrill. The first pictures come back. Of course, you want to see rabbits running around out there, and whatever. And I just remember that one guy, I think it was, I can't remember his name now, but there's rocks. There are rocks on Mars. Okay. Not quite rabbits, but it was good enough for me. But yeah, the future is now. I really, honestly, the last week and a half, how many things have happened? Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah. That's true. It's a whole new era of space exploration right now.
Yeah.
In the U.S., it's not only the government, right? There's companies. They're doing things on their own. It's incredible. So let's see what kind of questions you all have for us. Anybody want to go first?
Less of a technology question, but I was just curious where you do the majority of your filming and how much is CGI versus how much is actual physical sets.
There's a $15 million worth of sets in Budapest right now. They're all packaged up. They were in a container building, as typical of Hollywood sets, that you could have parked about 7 747s in. We built the largest green screen ever in the history of movie making so that we could go to Morocco and photograph where NASA rovers are tested, because it actually looks like and is a lot like the surface of Mars. Then project that on the screen, then have the actors in front of that screen. It's kind of remarkable stuff that they've done. They built full-size sets. For the first season, when I was walking through the sets, you really can begin to think you're on Mars in just a few minutes, because things are so realistic, down to, there was a little container in a hallway in the sets in the first season on Mars, and I picked it up and looked at it, and it was this container that supposedly something had been brought to Mars in, and it had like 6 different labels on it, approved by Inspector such and such and Houston and stuff like that. Down to the level that the camera would never pick up. These sets were so elaborate and so exacting because it allows the actors to get into the role and really feel like they're there. So we unfortunately lost our spot in Budapest. Budapest has now become a very popular place to make movies, and many movies that you think are British or American are actually made in Budapest these days. And we're probably going to move to Bucharest for the next season, if there's a next season, but because it's cheaper to make films there. But it's pretty elaborate stuff. You know, it's the stuff of making real movies as opposed to just a documentary series. So the investment in this has been extraordinary. I think for the first season, the sets there were $5 million worth of sets, and for the second season, they added another $10 million worth of sets, and the second season, the sets are just huge compared to the first season. So, and I think if there's a third and a fourth season, it will grow in that way.
Who decides on that? How does that happen? That's
Vice Presidents at Fox.
There's a question in the middle there.
So we've been imagining Mars colonization for years and years and years. Thinking about today, what things, challenges had we anticipated before that we're now better able to deal with, and what new challenges have we discovered that we didn't foresee back then?
That's probably for you.
Well, I'll start, but you can always add in. So I would argue that we've made great progress in determining how to land big things on Mars. So, and this is an area that I've worked in most of my career. And if you had asked me 10 years ago, you know, how we were going to land humans on Mars, I would have said, you know, I don't know. There were a lot of ideas out there 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago. There were a lot of kind of cartoon drawings that showed how one might do that. But none of that technology had been proven. And recently, actually here on the Earth, we've done a lot to prove those technologies. So one example would be, you know, when SpaceX returns these first stage boosters that they've done successfully over 30 times now. Way up high in the atmosphere, when they're bringing that booster back, they call out something called an entry burn. And that burn takes place supersonically in Mars relevant conditions, because you're up so high, you're up around 100,000 feet or higher when that burn takes place. And what they're doing is they're firing their jets in opposite to the direction of the velocity, so opposing free stream. And that's something that actually people have talked about a lot, but until SpaceX had a need to do that, no one had ever done that in Mars relevant conditions. And as I've said, they've done it, you know, for a big piece of hardware, they've done it 30 times or more successfully. You don't see that because it happens so high. You see the booster coming down, you know, right on the drone ship, and that's exciting too. But for those of us that are focused on Mars, we care about what happened at, you know, 40 kilometers or so altitude. Also, through the robotic program, I mean, you know, I started my career by landing Mars Pathfinder on the surface. It landed a little rover called Sojourner that was about the size of a baby. It was 11 kilograms in mass, and you know, Mars Science Laboratory is the size of a small car, right? It's a nuclear-powered car with a laser on it, right? That we landed in 2012. And that, by the way, in 2020, we're going to land much more accurately. We're going to land basically in a football field instead of in a 20-kilometer safe zone. So, you know, and that kind of accuracy is required to build up a base camp, right? If you, in the series, you see that there have been many landings, and in order to build up this base camp, those many landings have to happen in close proximity to each other to get all that hardware together. And that's a technology that we're improving. I think our ability to keep people, you know, alive, frankly, and to keep them safe so that they can live, play, and work in space, both in the microgravity environment of space and on another planet, has been greatly advanced by what we're doing on the International Space Station today. Leonard mentioned the 3 astronauts that just went, but they joined 3 others that are already there. And, you know, we've had people, you know, from our planet in space continuously since 2001. Think about that. Not the same people, but I mean, that's a remarkable achievement for our planet. And it's not just Americans, right? They're international astronauts included in that. And to think that we've lived off of our world continuously, some small subset of us, have done so continuously and safely since 2001. That tells you something about the reliability of the crew systems needed to keep people safe, about food processing, about water processing, radiation shielding, all of the kinds of technologies that you see played out in this series, they're happening today. And then the last piece that I'll mention, and I'll see if you want to add to that, is really correct, is just the advancement of industry, frankly, in this country. It's one thing for our government to be talking about sending humans back to the moon. It's a great, exciting thing. To repeat something like the Apollo missions from the 1960s, would be a fantastic achievement for our country. But what really impresses me and gets me going, gets my juices going, is the industry capabilities in this country at places like SpaceX or right here in Colorado at Lockheed Martin, or what's going on with Blue Origin or Virgin Galactic, all of these companies that are on their own contributing to the space economy. Planet Labs that is basically building almost a real-time Google Earth, right? It's remarkable what's happening in space today. And I think that capability is required for us to efficiently and cost-effectively go to Mars.
I think from a technical point of view, one of the most interesting things about going to Mars is that most of the technology that you needed to do this has been available for at least 30 years. I like to say 40 years, but probably 30 years. There's a device on the new Curiosity rover that's going up in 2020 called MOXIE that will split the carbon atom off the CO2 atmosphere of Mars and create enough oxygen for one human being to breathe consistently, for example. That machine is supposed to be designed to be scaled up by a factor of 100. I think NASA originally wanted that machine so that they could have an oxidizer on Mars to make rocket fuel for a return trip in the future. But in fact, that machine is probably going to turn out to be the machine that makes the oxygen that people need to breathe on Mars. I'm not quite sure what they're going to use for the rest of the inert gas, the other 78%, but that is still a technical problem. But what's amazing is that all this stuff, we made this decision to stay in Earth orbit a long, long time ago as the Apollo program was coming to an end, and we decided to build a space shuttle, which is supposed to be cheap and reusable and turned out to cost about over $1 billion for each flight. And we have not kind of reached out and extended what we're capable of doing. We haven't gone back to the moon, which I think would be kind of a waste, but we haven't taken a bold step like we did in the Apollo program and decided to let's just go to Mars yet we've had this capability to do this for so long. And to touch on one other thing that both Leonard and Bobby have touched on, space is the next big business. It isn't an accident that you see all these things happening in the last week or so. The Russians have committed to going to Mars and putting a human on Mars. The Chinese have committed to putting a human on Mars. Both the Russians and the Chinese have committed to put humans on the moon again. NASA has committed just recently to putting humans on the moon again. And yet, as Bobby says, there are all these private companies that could actually do it maybe even before any of these governments could do it. Companies like SpaceX, which actually intend to do it before a government does it. This is the next big business. Lassoing the SLS launch system and the Orion capsule that NASA has built. One of the original things they wanted to do with that, literally, was to go out and find a near-Earth asteroid and lasso it and bring it back and put it in orbit around the moon so that commercial companies could practice mining it. That's real. That's real technology that we have now that we're capable of doing. It's just going to be mind-blowing how this stuff expands, and it's expanding a lot because of the commercial aspects of space. It's really going to be a big business.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect place to chime in. I think that what is happening very rapidly is the movement towards securing ownership of resources. Who's going to own the resources? And the only existing international architecture was the Moon Treaty,
67 Space Treaty.
Outer Space 1967 Treaty. And the goal was to not have a militarized space. That was the goal of that treaty. It was a peace treaty. Now it's being written, our attempts, there's already national legislation that's happened in the United States and other attempts that are being written to define ownership of what you would mine in space, who owns it, who gets to profit from it. And that's all being driven right now by private companies, period. And that is a similar model, which is, will the private companies gain ownership of asteroids and the rights to mine asteroids and other planets and what they get there and how they do it? And will a regulatory regime only catch up after it's happening? And if that happens, are the unintended consequences of mining asteroids being thought through by the people who are intending to do the mining, or will that be an afterthought? And so OSIRIS-REx, one of its goals, this is the mission that Leonard just mentioned, that just yesterday successfully
got to Bennett. It hasn't done its recovery yet.
One of its goals is to determine the viability of asteroid mining. That's one of the intentions. And so, for someone like me who has spent her career looking at, the sort of follow the industry goes forward and sort of regulations attempt to follow afterwards, and what the consequences of those are, thinking about it now for me in this entirely new realm, which is, all of space and what the unintended consequences could be, is truly profound. And trying to encourage the public to participate in this process as much as industry is, before the cat gets much further out of the bag.
There was some kind of line that I don't think I came up with it. I stole it from somebody probably, but it was the, you do the peaceful uses of outer space, and then somebody says the useful. How does this go? No, I can't remember what I'm talking about. Okay, useful pieces of outer space.
Yeah, that works.
And that's interesting. I had one little quick short story. I used to go, every time there was a Mars mission, I'd go to JPL ahead of time, go talk to all the engineers. And one time I went in there, and this was on Pathfinder. The head guy goes and puts me in his office and shuts the door. And he says, if this fails, how will you guys report on this? And I said, well, how is this really going to work? He said, we're using airbags. Airbags, okay, let's see how that one goes. But that mission was the first time I ever heard of co-location, which is what you folks do here. And that was why it succeeded. They had people co-located in the same buildings to talk to each other. People that were working on the parachute for a month would all of a sudden be going over to another part of the wheels of the rover. Each person learned more about their spacecraft, but that was called co-location. And then I went back a couple years ago before Curiosity landed. How are you going to land that? Oh, a sky crane. It'll be dropped down on a tether. And you're going, I'm still buying drinks on that one because I...
All right. I can't wait
It's not going to work. And that, to me, the partnership that has to develop between people in these missions to make things happen is baton passing, space age baton passing. And each person contributes to the whole, and it's pretty amazing to watch.
What work needs to be done before we can actually send humans to Mars?
Not much of anything. It's a problem of money. Musk estimates that it's $36 billion to land the first humans on Mars. He doesn't have $36 billion. If he did, I think he'd probably start launching cargo missions this year. You need about 3 cargo missions to land successfully on Mars. Bobby and a lot of people from NASA think the first cargo landing that SpaceX attempts on Mars will probably fail, and they think that they will learn Huh?
Not probably.
A lot of people that I've talked to at NASA seem to think it will probably fail.
If you're gonna state my opinion, I'm gonna jump in.
All right.
So what I've said is that if you need 3, you should send 4.
Right.
Just before you send the humans, because one of them may fail. Go ahead.
But anyway, there's a lot to be learned from those failures. Extraordinary. I mean, you probably learn, if you have a successful landing and part of it is luck, that's not a learning experience. If you have a failure and you learn a lot from the failure and then you don't make the same mistakes again, things work a lot better in the future. So what I suspect is going to happen is that as soon, if Tesla becomes as successful as it should be, if Musk is able to launch 7,000 communication satellites and offer you data and voice for $9.95 a month and capture, there are 10 billion Wi-Fi connected devices on the planet, more than there are people. If he gets a fourth of that, or a fifth of that population, 2 billion, and he gets $10 a month from everybody, he's going to quickly have the money to launch people to Mars. So this is really a money problem and not a technology problem. If just as we threw money at Apollo in the 60s, 4% of the GDP of the United States went into that program. Now about 1/16 of the GDP of the United States goes into NASA. If you were to throw those kind of resources into landing people on Mars, there would definitely be people on Mars within 10 years.
So Elon Musk has recently said that SpaceX will land people on Mars in the next 6 years. What are your thoughts on that timeline? As a sub-question, what do you think is a more realistic timeline for that to happen?
I think they're kind of different. When I originally wrote my book, Musk told me 2024, 2025. And I said, come on. And he said, look, if we haven't landed people on Mars by 2030, I will be deeply disappointed. And he meant deeply disappointed, a kind of failure that he doesn't accept. He recently walked back his statement on when the first humans would be on Mars. He recently said, I don't think many people noticed this, but he was asked in an interview when the first people would land on Mars, and he said the thing he's been saying recently, which is 2024. And then he said, well, at least I'm certain we'll have a cargo mission by 2024. And that was a real walk back, because he said, I'm not sure we'll have people on Mars in 2024, which is what he's been saying. He said, but I'm sure we'll have a cargo mission. So give it a couple of years. Maybe the first cargo mission is 2026. Next cargo mission is 2028. Then 2030, you have a cargo mission, and maybe it simultaneously you have 2 rockets going, and you have a crew landing. That would be the estimate that I would give you right now.
There's a catch-22 in all this, and it is the life on Mars question. There's going to be probably some new information about methane detection on Mars, and that's going to be a very interesting possible connection for biology. The other thing that's happening is a lot of concern about planetary protection and the coordination of international groups. And Elon tossed his Tesla out there, and that was not a happy moment for the planetary protection people. Although it didn't get near Mars, or it's on some flew past it, but there's a problem, and there's I think there's going to be a headlong battle between planetary protection people and life detection people and privatization of Mars. So I'd watch that one. That's going to come, and we'll see. And the lawyers thing is the greatest. It's a head-on collision. It's just going to be wild. I mean, it's the Wild West sort of thing, but I think that's going to be another one. I've just finished some writing up, and I had to go talk to a lot of lawyers, and you can have the Rolodex of pro, con, no, we shouldn't do this and that. So we got some real issues coming.
I mean, I think the other issue that is being addressed in 2 separate questions instead of one is this issue of where the Outer Space Treaty was a peace treaty, was the intention of it was a peace treaty, and how significantly more advanced at this point weaponization of space and money. When you're talking about money, the U.S. Defense space budget, so the space budget of the defense industry, not NASA, was $45 billion the last time it was identified, and that was in 2015. So there's a lot of money there. And then where and how is the overlap being discussed of as you move much more quickly towards Mars and the amount of money that's needed to do that, and where the money currently resides, which is in the defense industry and weaponization? Will there be a marriage that many people who have for a long time sought peace in space, have fought to prevent?
That's why we need the Space Force.
There we go.
That's why we
So
have.
I just before you jump on that, 1 second. So I just add that, when you try to define a timeline for when the first humans will be on Mars, it depends a great deal on what the strategy is for those humans. So it actually wouldn't be that hard to just send a couple of humans to Mars, have them be there for a few weeks, a la Apollo, and then have them come back. And we could certainly, as a country, if we chose to, we could do that in the 2020s.
But we would probably do an Apollo 8 kind of thing and go into orbit and come back and not actually land.
Well, we could do both.
Yep.
But in the series, but in the series, what we've chosen to do, if you notice, it's many of the same astronauts from season 1 are still there in season 2. Sammy, as an example. And so if you're thinking about the first humans going to settle Mars, which is the way SpaceX and Elon Musk talk about this, there are many more cargo ships. There's much more of a base camp environment that needs to be built up, a lot more infrastructure. And so in my view, you're talking about the 2030s by the time you would send those humans because of all the emplacement of infrastructure that has to go first.
One good thing was, when I got the word to do this Mars book, I was at a conference at Johnson Space Center. They brought in all these scientists, and for the first time in one room, people sat around and talked about where do you land?
Yeah.
Where do we land, and where can the space be? And the exploration zones were being drawn out. I mean,
there's been real discussion of that.
Yeah, it's moving ahead.
There's a question back here.
So I apologize if you're fed up with this question. Were you influenced at all by Andy Weir's book, The Martian, in the series? And then vice versa, do you think he was influenced by your work? And what did you think of the science?
I have a personal story about that, which is in my book came out in 2015, in July of 2015. In April of 2015, I had been asked to do a TED Talk on Mars. And I did this talk. I've done 2 other TED Talks on the main stage of TED. And they were both greeted by wild applause and people standing up and everything. And this one was treated with polite applause. And I walked off the stage and I thought, what the hell happened here? Jeff Bezos had a dinner that night in which he basically tried to criticize every single thing I had said about people going to Mars and how this was a PR campaign by Elon Musk to gain more attention for Tesla and so forth. And the people who ran TED, the guy who runs TED is a close friend of mine, said, we're not putting your talk up online. And then in September, The Martian came out. So my book came out, wasn't selling. The Martian came out. I had sat down with Charlie Bolden when I was writing the book and talked about NASA's plans for humans landing on Mars. And he took me to one of the 10,000 pages, obscure pages of NASA that said in big bold type, NASA has no plans for a human mission to Mars. Right there on the website. Martian comes out, all of a sudden my book starts selling like crazy. TED decides to put my talk up online. Charlie Bolden appoints a director of manned mission to Mars. Didn't have any staff, but so that's how much influence a Hollywood movie had on society. It actually convinced people that this was a possibility. If Matt Damon can do it, we can do it.
And there's a dance remix of Stephen giving the TED Talk.
Oh, good.
And I'll also point out that Andy participated as one of the big thinkers in season 1. So he was a part of the first season of the Nat Geo series.
And I should mention that he's gone through kind of a metamorphosis too. He was very defensive initially about the facts that were inaccurate in his book. Like, 300-mile-an-hour wind on Mars is not going to drive a piece of an antenna through your spacesuit kind of thing. In fact, you could walk through a 300-mile-an-hour wind on Mars easily. It'd be like a 3-mile-an-hour wind on Earth. And he was very defensive about that. And then he got involved in season 1, and some of us were kind of beating up on him about that kind of stuff. And then season 2 came around, and we beat up on him some more. And now he's very open about what was wrong in the book.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. All right. So I'm told that we're out of time, but I want to thank you all for joining us here today. I'd highly encourage you to check out the series. Season 2 is continuing. You can check out episode 5 next Monday at 9 p.m. on the Nat Geo Channel. And I want to also, in addition to thanking our panelists, I want to thank Google
yes.
For welcoming us. Thank you very much.